I find it interesting as, many of us are hiding in the mountains, um, that when talking about the Siegel crime family, having lived many years in Vegas, selling timeshares, as well as in Florida, I lived a very short time. It was not rocket science to figure out that these people take others' lives. I'm also Sephardic Jewish, and I know within temples, we see them as serial killers because that's what they are. They're hybrids. And so, but there's been no accountability for what they've done. They support shelters, this, that, and the other, but important to know that they're killers. And there's no abuser in the world that holds accountable to all the lives, men and women, that they've taken. I remember I had a friend in Vegas, and this guy, Richard Allen Siegel, would show up with all his guys to torture the little Mexican man for the night. And she was an RN, and she'd open the window and be telling him off, to stop what the heck he was doing. She had no fear of him. I have no fear of him. Um, this is what is called a gang. And these are their ways, very much like what Messianic rabbis talk about. It's the, Frank syndrome. Frank had a lot of good qualities about him. He tried to help his sister, but Frank was a horrible killer, So what does Yahweh think about that? Well, obviously, it's not, it's nothing that would get these type of people approval from Yahweh, because everybody has to pay for their crimes. So it started with their shelters, and they would call other shelters. Haven Hills was a huge one in Mission Hills. For 3 years, I could not go to the gym without them calling me a child abuser. And they were bringing in this lady, Rachel Sonya Rodriguez, saying I abused her child. And what I ended up finding out from the ladies was that Richard Siegel would call Haven Hills Shelter and Mission Hills, and they all had free passes to go to the gym, so they would be there morning, noon, and night, and he would tell them to harass me. And so they would. If I was wherever I was in the gym, they would be harassing me. This is what they would tell me, that they were going to kill me, this, that, and the other. And then I realized that he was going to all the DV shelters in America. Basically, he'd call them and ask if they had a bed for one of his ladies, and that were also his thugs, and and that's how he did it. But he just didn't do it with those type of shelters. He did it with rehabs, he did it with homeless shelters, with the rescue missions, with the Salvation Armies, and that is punishable against the law that we live in. And it was not done to humiliate me and hurt me. It was done for 2 reasons: so I could die, and in their belief system, not make it to heaven. This started with various different crimes that were going on over at their Harbor House location that they used to have. And when I think about Apopka, Florida in 2020, being from Southern California, I remember when I'd be sitting at the bus stop there'd be these 3 drug dealers right across from Apopka Sheriff's Department, morning, noon, and night, dealing and selling drugs. Funny story, one day I just happened to get up, and I was standing, I guess, where they do, and all sorts of cars started coming up by me. I mean, like, we have some money for the cocaine. I said, I'm not a drug dealer. The same Italian man that led those 3 guys across the street from the sheriff's department in Apopka, Florida, that guy would show up at the Harbor House shelter at night and would be roaming around. Of course, him and the 3 black guys that dealt drugs in Apopka, Florida, would be talking about all the people that they were going to kill, so on and so forth. So justice needs to be served. There was a lot of loss, a lot of souls that need justice. Okay. And the reality is, this is organized crime. So when you have the syndicates, this is what they are. They're rapists, killers, drug dealers. They're against the law of the land. And when they open up these shelters, it gives them a great law for them, which is they cannot enter unless there's a warrant in hand. So there were several complaints that were made. Of course, my ex is retired law enforcement, and a lot of things were done that I can't say where justice was absolutely served. So instead of closing it, the chief of police decides to be making weekly visits to say that organized crime is doing a great job with running their shelter. And so now we see Morgan & Morgan supporting their new facility, but it will not change the lives that were lost, and it won't change the lives they've taken. Often when I remember, Googling this guy, David Siegel. Okay. This guy, his wife, Jackie Siegel, has accused me through her friend Valerie, of being with, which I would never go with, a grandpa who's married and who kills people for fun. You could see it in his eyes. Looking at his picture, you could see all the lives that were taken. You could see the evil. The eyes are the window to the soul. And if we had looked at Westgate in 2014 and who their contributors were, their donors, they were all the top 10 crime families on the FBI files. So, when I'm going through this and I'm thinking of the harassment and really what they caused to happen, and the people they work with are all killers their own. Rachel, Sonya, Rodriguez, Guy, Steve, Brian Bonanno. Joe Bonanno is his grandpa who started the Bonanno crime family. We all know what they've been doing in Arizona ever since. And so these people, and then we go to Sam Bonanno, who worked for Westgate, I think, for about 20 years, and who is their hired hit guy, is known for that. They're going to get away with their crimes and, be philanthropists. You could open up every homeless shelter from here to Kathmandu, go over to the Himalayas and have 10 homeless shelters, but that won't change the lives you took. And the lives you hurt, but the lives you took, men and women. And so when I think about what crime syndicates are doing, Yahweh will not be mocked. This is talked about in the Greek Revelation and Isaiah, but it will not change what they did. A mobster could decide he's going to give all his money to his new nonprofit organization that's going to go all around the world, but it won't change the lives the crime boss took. The people he harmed, that's not going to change. That there needs to be justice. And so in this is what I'm saying. Okay, because these are known criminals, these are known crime bosses, these are known, gang members, and this is what was done to me. So, as I'm going through it, they taking the shelters they got in Florida, then calling for this shelter, calling for that shelter, the rehab shelter, whatever, and asking for beds for their clients that normally have worked for them, and their Black children have worked for them, ages 15 to 17, doing the crimes for them. And they come over with my picture and their little cell phones, and they call the staff at these shelters, and he says, well, do you know about this girl? Right? And so then it trickles to all the clients, and then I hear about it. When the reality is, I don't know these people, and I did exactly what God wanted me to do when I called the cops and had to jump out a window because his thugs that were clients there tried to kill me. Two big Black guys about 17, 18 years old, and their mom. And I was never so scared in my life. They wanted the mother to go block the window, but she was afraid what the ladies would think. And I said, God, it was one of the most scariest moments of my life. I said, God, don't let me die in Florida. Don't let me die in Florida. I get my stuff and I jump out and I call the sheriffs. And then ever since then has been the mass exploitation of me. In a world we really didn't know existed. We didn't know about the orange world until COVID. We just didn't. As God said, we wouldn't. And so, he's with us. We're hiding in forests, dens, and mountains right now, and he is with us. He guides us. We're being chased from town to town. He's still with us. These crime families need to be brought to justice. It's one thing when they do it and, to their own or, and God sees.